One man went to jail for stealing money. The same year he went to jail, his own company made a bet almost nobody believed in. 13 years later, that bet made his company worth more than most entire countries put together. Not because they played it safe, because of a tiny computer part nobody else wanted to build. The same part now inside almost every machine that's learning to think. This company didn't start with its own name. It began as Hyundai Electronics, the chip-making arm of the same Hyundai empire that built cars. Chips were just a side project. When that bigger company split apart in 2001, the chip part was cut loose on its own, and it almost died immediately. Prices for the memory chips it made crashed so hard that the company ran out of money. The banks that had lent it cash had to step in just to keep it breathing, like a patient kept alive on machines. It wasn't winning, it was surviving. In 2012, SK Group, a conglomerate run by a man named tae-won, bought a controlling stake in this struggling chipmaker. It became SK Hynix. Che didn't build his empire. He inherited it. His family had controlled SK Group since before he was born. And in 1998, at just 37 years old, his father died of cancer and handed him the entire conglomerate overnight in the middle of the Asian financial crisis, one of the worst economic collapses in Korea's history. He'd been running that empire for over a decade when SK bought this failing chip company in 2012. He wouldn't be free to watch what happened next. In January 2013, a Seoul court found that Che had taken over $40 million that wasn't his, to quietly cover money he'd personally lost gambling on stocks. 4 years in prison. The court finds the defendant guilty on all counts. That same year, while the man who'd inherited the company sat behind bars, SK Hynix made the single biggest decision of its life. The person actually running the company day to day was a career chip engineer named Park Sung-wook, appointed CEO that same year. He hadn't inherited anything. He'd joined SK Hynix in 1984 as a rank-and-file engineer and spent 30 years working his way up, through the research lab, through the factory floor, until the board made him CEO in 2013. He pushed the board to co-develop something with AMD called HBM, High Bandwidth Memory. Here's the simple version. A processor is a factory. Normal memory feeds it through a single-lane road, one delivery truck at a time while the factory waits. HBM bulldozes that road and builds a 10-lane highway, stacked right on the factory's doorstep. Park, who's buying this? Gamers don't need 10 lanes. Nobody needs 10 lanes. Nobody needs it yet. Then why are we spending money we don't have on it? Because when somebody finally does need this much bandwidth, there won't be time to build it from scratch. That's not a business plan. That's a hunch. It's a hunch with a decade of lead time, if I'm right. Samsung looked at the same math and passed. Bigger company, more to lose, less appetite for a product with no customers. Micron passed too. There was no market. HBM was expensive, niche, and by every normal measure, a terrible bet, made by a company that had already nearly died once, pushed by one engineer, while the man who owned the company sat in a prison cell. Tae-won was pardoned in August 2015 and came back to a company still waiting for its bet to matter. The official reason? The economy needed him. Korea pardons its jailed chaebol bosses surprisingly often. Samsung's own chairman got the same deal. Twice. 2016, Park Sung-wook gets promoted to vice chairman. SK Hynix is still building HBM. Still, almost nobody is buying it. We've spent 3 years on this memory chip. What's it made us? Patience. Patience doesn't show up on a balance sheet. 2018, Park steps back from the CEO chair. New leadership takes over. HBM is still a rounding error in the company's revenue. A research project that refuses to become a product. 2020, SK Hynix makes a completely different bet. A $9 billion deal to buy Intel's entire NAND memory business, a separate kind of chip. It's a huge, boring, unrelated diversification move. Nobody watching this company is thinking about HBM anymore. Then, on November 30th, 2022, a company most people had never heard of released a chatbot called ChatGPT. It got 1 million users in 5 days, 100 million in 2 months, the fastest growing piece of software in history. And almost nobody at SK Hynix realized yet that this chatbot was about to make their 10-year-old unwanted memory chip the most important product they'd ever built. That same year, a new CEO named Kwak No-jung took the helm, a company veteran who'd started his career decades earlier at Hyundai Electronics, the same predecessor company this whole story began with. Here's why the timing mattered. Training an AI model isn't limited by how fast a chip can think. It's limited by how fast data can reach it. HBM, that unwanted 10-lane highway, turned out to be exactly the road every AI chipmaker on Earth suddenly needed. In June 2022, SK Hynix became the first company in the world to mass-produce HBM3 for NVIDIA, not Samsung, the far bigger, far richer rival. SK Hynix. Samsung tried to catch up. In 2024, Samsung submitted its next-generation HBM chips to NVIDIA for approval. These chips are overheating and drawing too much power. They don't pass. We'll have a fix within the quarter. SK Hynix already passed a year ago. Samsung's HBM3E chips failed NVIDIA's heat and power tests in 2024. A real widely reported failure for the biggest memory maker on the planet. SK Hynix, meanwhile, was already shipping HBM3E inside NVIDIA's H200 chips. The reason came down to one unglamorous manufacturing technique called mr-muf, a bonding process SK Hynix had quietly perfected that dissipates heat about 1/3 better than the method Samsung was using and does it at room temperature instead of blasting the chips at 300 degrees. Nobody names a company after a bonding technique, but this one is arguably the reason SK Hynix won the decade. Samsung didn't pass NVIDIA's qualification for its 12-layer HBM3E chip until September 2025, more than a year behind. So who's actually in this race, and why did SK Hynix come out ahead of all of them? NVIDIA isn't really a rival at all. NVIDIA designs the brain, the GPU that does the thinking. It doesn't make memory. It needs someone else's HBM to feed that brain data fast enough to be useful. That makes SK Hynix less of a competitor to NVIDIA and more like its most important supplier, the company that controls whether NVIDIA's chips can actually perform. Samsung is the giant that blinked. It's still the larger company overall, with a bigger total business than SK Hynix. But on this one product, the product that ended up mattering most, it was slower, more cautious, and got beaten on a manufacturing detail. By 2026, SK Hynix held somewhere around 55 to 63% of the global HBM market. Samsung was still catching up from around 25 to 35%. Micron is the quiet climber. The American memory maker had almost nothing in this race, about 2% of the HBM market back in 2023. By 2025 and 2026, Micron had clawed its way up to somewhere near 19 to 20%, genuinely catching up, even passing Samsung in some product categories, but still a distant third to SK Hynix. The pattern across all three. SK Hynix's edge was never about being the richest or the biggest. It was about being the only one who kept building the unwanted highway for 10 straight years, so that when everyone needed it at once, only one company already had it finished. In May 2026, SK Hynix crossed $1 trillion in market value, a number so big it's almost impossible to picture. Then, on July 10th, 2026, it listed on the NASDAQ for the first time. A $26.5 billion stock sale, oversubscribed nearly 7 times over, the largest first-time stock sale any foreign company had ever done in America. Bigger than Alibaba's, second only to a rocket company's IPO the month before. Two men rang the ceremonial bell that day. One was tae-won, the chairman who was sitting in a prison cell the year the winning bet was placed. The other was Kwak No-jung, the CEO who wasn't even at the company yet when that bet was made, now steering it through the single biggest moment in its history. The engineer who actually made the call, Park Sung-wook, wasn't at the podium at all. By 2026, he'd long since moved on to an advisory role. He wasn't there for the applause. He was just right, 13 years before anyone else was. The most important decision in this company's history wasn't made by the man who owned it, or the man who got to ring the bell when it finally paid off. It was made by an engineer who bet everything on a highway nobody thought they'd need, while the owner wasn't even free to say yes or no, and the man who'd eventually take the credit hadn't even joined the company yet.